Welcome back. British Columbia is celebrating a major legal victory today. In a 6-1 ruling, the Supreme Court of Canada paved the way for that province to pursue a lawsuit on behalf of other Canadian provinces and the federal government. The class action suit targets companies that produce opioids, saying they contributed to the opioid epidemic in the way that they marketed the products. The BC Coroner Service says between January and October of this year, 1,750 people have died as a result of toxic drug overdoses. Now, nationally, in the first 3 months of 2024, the federal government says there were just over 1,900 opioid-related deaths, and that is about 21 every day. So what's next for BC's legal battle? Niki Sharma is British Columbia's Attorney General. Hi, Mr. Sharma. Welcome to Power Play.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So the BC allegation is that 49 pharmaceutical companies, including some retailers, contributed to the opioid epidemic by falsely marketing their products as being less addictive and less prone to abuse. Now, this allegation hasn't been proven in court just yet. So how does your government intend on doing that?
Yeah, we've really had a leadership role here in BC of taking on these opioid companies. The opioid crisis is affecting people all over this country, and we think that opioid companies should be accountable for their role in that. And we had a significant victory today, which I'm very pleased about, where they said, no, we don't have the ability to have a national level class action through our legislation. And what the Supreme Court of Canada said today was some really important things about how provinces and the federal government can get together to work on crises that don't have any borders, where there's an impact across the country. And certainly the opioid crisis has been one of them. And we're really pleased with the results today, and we will continue our fight through the courts against these companies.
Some observers have compared this class action suit to the lawsuit against tobacco companies. Do you think it's as clear-cut when you consider that these prescription drugs, that these are prescription drugs, I should say, and tobacco is not something that's prescribed?
Yeah, you know what, I think what we have in common with those two matters is the impact on public health costs that provinces have endured because of what we're saying is wrongful action by the companies. Of course, each issue will show up differently, and certainly the opioid pharmaceutical companies and their role is different than tobacco. But those two things are common, I think. So what we're saying through our lawsuit is that the public, through governments, shouldn't be held for the healthcare costs of those wrongfully or negligently marketed or sold products. And they're structured differently against opioids and tobacco, but the result is the same, is that governments all over this country are facing the costs of the impacts of these products.
The Canadian Centre on Substance Abuse and Addiction has said the high rates of opioid prescription have really contributed to the increased exposure to opioids and their potential risks. So what do you think should be done to tackle that side of it?
Yeah, there's clearly a lot of work to do that we have as governments across the world in a lot of ways, and certainly North America, to deal with the impacts of the opioid crisis on people's everyday lives. But certainly the pharmaceutical companies have a role to play in that, along with the government in tackling that crisis. And the focus that I've had as Attorney General and the province of British Columbia is on the ways that we can get the law to acknowledge that accountability through the courts.
So the contaminated illegal drug supply that we're seeing on the streets has also been responsible for thousands of deaths right across this country, particularly in your province. Do you think that this ruling will do anything to help cut that supply of contaminated drugs on the streets?
We have a whole bunch of actions that we're taking here in BC, and I know governments across the country are. It's a very complicated problem to solve, and we need to be there with people. And how we're doing that is putting money into resources and treatment and recovery and different ways that we can mitigate the impacts of these products. And what we're saying through this lawsuit is that those pharmaceutical companies that led to some of the impacts we're seeing should also be paying for the damages that they incurred on the populations of the country.
But then what happens in the next step? And I guess my question is, I'm sure that the cash settlement would be something that you're looking for, but how do you go forward in this and making sure that that drug supply that we're seeing on the streets is either cut off or no longer as toxic as it is right now?
Yeah, and that is part of the suite of things that we're doing, and I think every government is doing, whether it's policing or figuring out treatment and recovery options for people, for getting to people before they get addicted to what is a really toxic supply that could cause death. It's educational programs, all the things that I think a lot of us, including BC government, is doing. And I think through these lawsuits, we're saying we shouldn't be the only ones bearing the cost of those programs. And any settlement that came out of a lawsuit like that would go into what is showing up as harms in our communities.
On those harms in your communities, I mean, a lot of people across the country, in a large extent, unfortunately, look at BC and see what's happening there and say that's an example of where it's really gotten to a bad place. Where do you think the turning point is? And I understand that this is one part of it, and this is one part of that fight. But in terms of the more generalized fight against the opioid crisis, what do you think that your government can do to show that kind of leadership and really turn the page on this?
Yeah, it's been devastating for a lot of people in British Columbia, and it's had a toll on families who have lost family members due to this crisis. And there are examples of this happening across North America and the world where this toxic drug supply is impacting people, and certainly in BC we've seen that. And I think the turning point will be getting the resources to people to stop and to get the treatment that they need and get the supports they need through the medical interventions to get on the path to healthy living, but also making sure that the health system and everything is ready to support people through that. It's a very complicated issue, and we as a government really want, not only through this lawsuit, but also through the actions we're doing with partners and communities across this province, to be there for people so we can turn a page on the crisis.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. BC Attorney General Niki Sharma, thanks so much for being with us.
No problem. Thanks for having me.